but now the number of tools to make you more effective are coming at you at a higher and higher velocity.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barrett, host of the Salesman Podcast, and welcome to today's show. Today's show, we have Eric Taussig, and he is the CEO of Prialto. And today's conversation is very simple, extremely simple. Eric is sharing why, and I totally agree with all this, why salespeople should have an assistant. You can find out more about Eric over at prialto.com. Everything we talk about, all the links are available in the show notes for this episode over at salesman.red/254. And with all that said, let's jump into today's show. Hi, Eric, and welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Hi, Will. Good to be here.
I'm glad to have you on, mate. And I talked about this just before, we talked about this just before I clicked record, and full disclosure to the audience I'm totally on board of today's conversation. I could perhaps share some anecdotes of what I've done in the past with it, and I know you'll have a bunch of anecdotes and success stories as well to share. But I'm going to ask you a super open-ended question, very purposefully, because you're probably going to have loads more insights and data on all of this than what I have anecdotally. And that is, why do sales professionals, B2B sales professionals specifically, why do they need some kind of an assistant?
Well, I think it's more like, why do they need them again? Because I think, a white shoe, salesperson selling a high-end product, high transaction price point would have normally had an assistant. And as the tools for being more self-contained got better and better, the expectation then became that you would be self-contained. And that's great. But now the number of tools to make you more effective are coming at you at a higher and higher velocity. For every issue you have, workflow issue you have today, there are 10 mobile or web apps to solve that issue, and next week there'll be 20, and you just don't have time to distill all that down, filter them, and adopt them. And so an assistant can help you do that. I don't think there's any question that if you're a productive person, that you can benefit from delegating work to somebody else. I think the real question is, are you better off hiring an individual, which you may be, or are you better off hiring a managed service? So we're a managed service. So we give you, yes, an assistant, but we give you a team working in tandem with that assistant as well to help you and the assistant become productive together.
Because from my perspective as a sales professional, I've had pretty much every sales manager has said two things to me. One, add more value, and they've not really understood what that is, but they just say it verbatim. The other thing that every single sales manager says to every single sales professional is stop wasting your time doing things that aren't selling. Yet every job I've had increasingly through the medical years I spent in medical devices and in chemical sales before that, there was more and more admin every year, whether it be CRM admin, which most of the time benefits management as opposed to you as an individual, when the data that's being pulled from it can be used in things that are beyond even the scope of this podcast and this audience. And the admin just kept on building and building and building. I've talked about it on the show before. I just typically was very poor at doing it. And that was all forgiven at the end of the year when you hit target. But the rest of the year, I was constantly hounded, and I was a pain in the ass for my sales manager. So is this conversation as simple as salespeople should be spending time selling, and other tasks, whether it be delegated to software, which sounds nice in theory, but really works as well in practice as what we're sold on the concept of it doing? And so should salespeople be selling, and should all the other admin tasks be just passed on to someone else?
Yeah, I mean, the headline is that simple, but there's a lot of nuance underneath as you dig into it, I think. So, yeah, I mean, I think sales managers sit in the back room and talk about eliminating excuses, right? And a lot of the way they do that is by layering on a bunch of tools that actually consume your time, like you said. And the thing is, I mean, there's an art and there's a science to selling. I think all of us who sell know that. Sales managers know that too. As salespeople, we sometimes put more emphasis on the art. Sales managers put more emphasis on the science, and the truth is in between. But I think the sales guy no matter how small a proportion of the selling process is art, that is the most valuable part that the salesperson's bringing to the table. It's that intangible, that ability to manage a transaction with another human being from start to finish. And so the more you can take the science, I don't want to say away from the salesperson, but make it a wind in his or her sail rather than a weight around his or her ankle, the better off everybody is.
And talking about the science, Eric, and I don't want to put you on the spot. I don't know if you guys have data or if there's market research on the sales industry to support some of this, because clearly anecdotal, it makes a lot of sense. But is there data that shows salespeople spend a huge amount of time doing tasks that could be outsourced to other individuals, and are they more efficient when that is outsourced to other people? Is there any data and science to back this up?
Well, there's a lot of data out there, and you can Google around, and I've at different times had those numbers kind of on the tip of my tongue. But I feel disingenuous kind of spouting that off, because every sales situation is there are many different sorts of sales environments, and selling products at different price points, services at different price points require different setups. I think you can look at things like number of conversations. You can certainly build up an ROI case, and we do that from time to time. The drivers are things like number of conversations to a transaction, the price point of a transaction, the lifetime value of the customer, those sorts of things.
Well, give us a little bit of context around this, because I know we've only scratched the surface, but I know there's going to be a whole chunk of the audience now, especially in the B2B, the enterprise, the higher end sales side of things, who are listening to this, who go, I've been telling my sales manager this for years, decades even, perhaps, depending on how long they've been in their industry.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's any secret source to your ROI calculations. Clearly, if it's wrapped up, then you don't need to share that. But is there a group of number of conversations per transaction, or a certain price point where this becomes a no-brainer? So I'm thinking really practically for the audience now, whether we'll talk about your service in a bit, but whether they go to you or someone else, is there a point where they should stand up and say, hey, there's real tangible benefits to this, and the numbers make sense as well?
Yeah. So I think if the transaction is it's borderline at kind of $12,000 to $14,000 a transaction, and borderline if it gets much below $1 million in quota. If you've got a decent transaction point, and you've got a decent a pretty average quota, then an assistant at the price point we provide them just makes a ton of sense. And so then you talk about the simple bullet points. I mean, you don't want to have a $300 an hour guy doing $10 an hour work. Right? It's just that simple. At the same time, what happens today, where we love technology as much as anybody else. We have Silicon Valley in our DNA. We were founded in Silicon Valley. We have Silicon Valley investors, a lot of Silicon Valley CEOs in our and salespeople in our portfolio. But the adoption rate of a lot of tools is actually very low. You end up having a lot of SaaS subscription dollars on your in your management arsenal that go unused or poorly spent, and a lot of those tools are better off adopted by an assistant whose job it is to focus on the adoption and powering of those tools at times.
Well, I can totally agree with that. The last company I was with was a multi-billion-dollar company that had no CRM, but we all had access to all these tools that we never use. And I think our user case in the medical device world is different perhaps to a good chunk of the audience who are listening to this, in that we were kind of field-based. We would, essentially it was based on relationships. A lot of the products, because it's so highly regulated, were so close in the specifications and how good and the high quality they were, that it was the relationships that really mattered. And so what I want to go with here is like Chris came on as assistant, I think his title was assistant or trainee salesperson, whatever it was. And he was essentially there to help. We had one per team. So I had him, I had a logistics guy that would help move kit around to save me driving around like a lunatic on a Friday night to grab a demo camera and take it from one place to another for a demonstration on Monday. And both lads, John and Chris, saved me a whole ton of legwork. So Chris would perhaps go in and deal with the customers that I knew really well that needed, and this is a different use case, I know, to the service you provide there, Eric, but he would go in and help me with the perhaps smaller customers that it wasn't really worth, it sounds bad to say, but it wasn't really worth my time when I could be spending my time with the bigger deals that were on the table. And ROI-wise, it was an absolute no-brainer. So what I want to ask, which I'm really intrigued to, so I've mentioned admin. If you've got someone in-house on your team that can physically go and help out if you're in field-based, clearly there's, seeing more customers, more FaceTime with customers, more calls with customers, and things of that nature. But with your team where it is, Eric, and set up, there's probably loads of things that when you put the service into practice, you didn't realize that they were going to be able to help with. Are there anything else other than the classic kind of filling in the CRM, all the stuff that salespeople are supposed to do and never do because, quote unquote, boring? Was there any real surprises that came up that your team are doing when they're assisting salespeople?
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of a hard ROI when you talk about making sure that data is there. If you, like you said, so those are the no-brainer things, and if you're either doing that with somebody internally, hopefully, or you're hiring an assistant, and there it's pretty easy to make the case if you understand the value of good data, et cetera. But there's a soft ROI too, right? So a sales guy having a partner who is captive to him or her, who's focused on making you productive. That stuff shouldn't be underappreciated either, right? So a salesperson tends to kind of work very often the majority of his or her time in a silo, and having somebody that's kind of an accountability partner can be very valuable. So our assistants have helped with that, sort of task management. Also, the transferring of best practices. So we know that if we're talking to a sales manager, that you put almost any tool in the hands of that A player, and that person's just going to be that much better. They appreciate the acknowledgement, and they will leverage the tool because they're always, those A players are just really good at eking as much value out of their limited day as possible. But making those B players, taking the process and the practices for those A players and transferring that knowledge through a trained assistant and helping those B players get better is remarkably valuable as well.
So this is something that I wanted to ask you very specifically about. So in my sales career, I've always been in, say, the top 20, 30%. I've always hit target, but never really crushed it. And you mentioned something then which made me smile, because accountability, not so much for getting the job done, but for things like replying to emails promptly, more internal ones than from customers. Things like that. If I had someone to give me a kick in the ass when I needed to, or at the end of the day, give me an email of do these things before you close your laptop, something like that would have just changed the whole experience I had in sales. And it wasn't through perhaps skiving or a lack of accountability. It was just being so busy running around and not managing my time as effectively as what it could have been done. Is having an assistant perhaps the difference between an A or B player, in that an A player can do all this and sell, whereas perhaps a B player or C player, they need that extra bit of support to be able to have the output of an A player?
Yeah, sometimes I think here's the thing is I think a lot of times um, the tools that sales managers want salespeople to adopt are there to help a salesperson become more effective. Very often, though, it comes across as giving the sales manager visibility, and so um, you know,
But
yes,
let me
sales
ask you that
tool,
then. But is
yeah,
that true? Or is that a misconception? Because I know a lot of the tools I've been, I'm going to use the word that I was going to use, and I hesitated then, that I've been forced to use. Never helped me. All it did was help a sales manager be able to catch me, slacking, which I never did. Is
right.
that a common
That's exactly what
misconception?
I'm saying. Exactly what I'm saying is that a lot of times, especially stuff around CRM, CRM well used should again be a wind in a salesperson's sail, but more often than not, it's an ankle weight and um, and a source of conflict between the sales manager and the salesperson. When you give a person an assistant, um, you're going to get all the same sort of visibility and enforcement of best practices, but you're giving somebody a partner. And what I meant by an accountability partner is, yes, reminding a salesperson that this dashboard is here to be reviewed. So he knows to send that email, or that the email hasn't been replied to, or this prospect hasn't been touched for X period of time. But what about, really neat things like when a salesperson leaves an in-person meeting, a lunch, um, you know, and because your assistant is managing your calendar, the assistant can call you when you're leaving that meeting and ask you the best practice questions that you should be asking yourself, and logging the answers into the CRM, and then doing some of that initial follow-up. There's nothing more slick than a basic proposal or follow-up coming to that person you just had lunch with, and that person knows that you barely made it back to your car. It has a polish around it. It has a completeness, a follow up that is timely, that you otherwise wouldn't have, and it's connected to all sorts of the, other parts of the sales process um, that are key to keeping things moving forward.
So this is I know we're going to talk about sales, and we'll continue to, because that's what makes up the majority of our audience. But this is an effort in branding as well for the business, isn't it? As a whole, if you can respond quicker and have a more polished service that add tangible value to the prospects themselves, isn't it?
I think so, and especially I think in any sort of sales environment, but especially if you're selling a service or a high price point product. There's so much noise out there. People are constantly inundated. Our email boxes are full. We're getting media from all different directions. We're also getting communicated to through so many different types of tools. People are yearning for simplicity, for clarity and authenticity. And when you follow up quickly and in a timely manner, it helps cut through all that clutter.
Sure, and it's differentiator in my mind, and it's also an opportunity to spend more face time with the individuals themselves. From my perspective as a salesperson having this conversation, clearly the differentiator between all the marketing optimization, everything that's going on in the industry, and there's many sales enablement companies that are trying to push the sales industry down this path. And clearly they're ahead of the game and they can see where things are going perhaps, but they're trying to push people down this path of spamming out emails that are slightly modified, versus if you could, and tell me if this is something that could be offered as part of your service as well, if you could either voice dictate an email to your assistant and they get back to them, the prospect. Something like that is a service that, or part of the service to your prospect, that could really set you apart if you can come back promptly with even a message, if it's from your assistant rather than from your email address directly. That is something that is tangible. That is something that the prospect listening or reading the message themselves are going to feel warm and fuzzy about, versus this half spammed email message that goes out to everyone that's kind of the name tag has been changed and that's about it.
Yeah, or capturing some behavior that you've had on their website. I mean, the creep factor, I think with some of the marketing automation can't be, I think can't be overappreciated. I mean, I think that, look, I love software. I love automation where automation makes sense, but it doesn't brand your product well to kind of tell your prospect that we know what you're doing on our website. It just creeps them out. And now being knowledgeable about what a customer is interested in is extremely valuable, and having the software serve that up for the salesperson who can take that information and then have that information power the art of managing the relationship. That's incredible. But yeah, the partially spammed, mostly spamming emails doesn't help your brand.
So let me ask you. Let me ask you a wider context question here, Eric, because I think this is important from our conversation so far, and that is: do you feel sales is going to do a U-turn on all this automation? Do you feel like, because it's something that perhaps marketing can even just take over, and do you think the real value for a salesperson right now in the kind of internet age, as I call it, is this one-on-one human contact, and whether it's over email, in person, over phone? Is that the value that we as sales professionals can really add to the marketplace?
Absolutely. But being armed with software, so that you are spending software or process so that you're spending more time nurturing that relationship with better information. That's where technology is truly powerful. And the way I think about it is, it may be a great investment thesis to invest in tools that eliminate people from jobs, but it's not a great sales thesis. Now there are times when I want to self-serve myself through a sale, but not when it's a high price point, high consideration item, right? And that's almost any service, and anything certainly over $12,000, right? Like there, I want real information, and I want to. I don't want to be forced to simply self-serve through Yelp reviews and FAQ pages. I want to talk with an individual who can has pattern recognition, who is dynamic, etc. And I think that certainly is. So yes, again, helping the salesperson focus where they're most valuable, which is that art part.
And final question on just this part of the show, because I'm intrigued to, with your background as well specifically. Do you feel like that $12,000-$14,000 mark, do you think that's going to raise up over time, or do you think that is just what humans, regardless of inflation or that kind of number? Do you think that kind of number in the marketplace will always require a human on the other end of the contact, and it can't be replaced by an online order form?
Well, the actual dollar amount might change, but I'm talking about $12,000 in today's dollars. That feels like about right. I mean, actually, it's probably quite a bit lower, but that's a challenge for people that sell things at that price point, because once you get below that, it's hard to justify a enterprise, kind of fully commissioned, fully quota carrying salesperson. So I think you mentioned, so I wanted to just come back to that piece of, you said, is it as simple as the salesperson should be, their value is that human to human contact. The way I think about it is, if you're, if you're launching a company today, and you've got a product that can suck, the person costs out of a company. That's probably a good investment thesis, for better or worse, and that's a whole different subject. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about enabling salespeople for an organization that needs salespeople. And in that world, sales managers shouldn't be thinking about when they think about adopting tools, it's not as simple as how can I take work off this salesperson's plate so that they can do more other stuff. It's more if today somebody is spending 80% of their time on admin work and 20% of their time on strategic work, let's reverse that. And that's where software is really powerful. If you can get a person, and so you think about a salesperson's world today, that self-contained person, they're spending all their time just trying to get in front of somebody, as well as logging all the stuff that they're doing to get in front of somebody so that people know they're actually doing some work, and a small fraction of their time actually nurturing those relationships. And I think a good sales manager would seek to reverse that ratio.
Definitely. I'm totally on board, Eric. And mate, I've got a couple of questions I ask everyone that comes on the show, so we'll very quickly run through these. I'm conscious of time. First one, what is one book or resource that you'd recommend to the Salesman Podcast audience?
Ooh, I should have thought about that in advance. So we certainly love Predictable Revenue, the Aaron Ross book for inside sales stuff, and we've successfully followed that process and also helped other organizations do the same. For outside stuff, the guys that we're talking about enabling, who are out meeting with clients and really building their network and nurturing that network. Just the more reading you can do in general, I would say better. And I wouldn't necessarily be sitting there reading about how to be more effective in sales. I would be reading about stuff that the network that you want to be building is interested in.
Okay, let me just double down on that. Would you, if you don't have to name any specific books, but you mentioned networking a bunch of times then, for an outside sales rep, and they make up a small percentage of our audience than what they perhaps did 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Is networking the key? If you had to choose like a genre of book that you were a new sales guy come in, is that what you'd recommend? Not like body language, not like maybe questioning would be up there as well. But is networking the key thing here? Well,
I think if you are selling a service, networking is everything, because selling a service, the differentiating factor in a service is the quality of that service, which means it's a high trust sale. And so people validating that you're authentic and trustworthy is key. And because other people need to say things about you that you can't say yourself. I don't know that you need to read a lot of books about that. I'd say, Google networking and read the 2 or 3 books with a lot of stars next to them, and then move on, because networking is not, yes, there's process, but it's not about finding the latest fad. It's about following any sort of basic process, but more importantly, being a dynamic, well-informed individual that can connect with a lot of people. And I think good salespeople do that naturally.
Definitely. Eric, I've got one final question for you, mate. It's something that I ask everybody that comes on the show, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
I would say to become better at selling. Well, I think that a lot of people come out of school thinking that sales is not high on the food chain. Having started a company, having been in a lot of different competitive environments, sales is absolutely essential to driving innovation. It's salespeople that get out there and listen to the customer, and so I would say that people who come out of school with a respect for the people who drive revenue are better off. And I'd also say that if you want to do almost anything in business, getting some sales experience early on is valuable, no matter where you want to end up in an organization.
Definitely. I appreciate that. That is empowering to our audience. And so I always appreciate that, Eric. And we've touched on it a couple of times, but tell us more where we can find out more about you and then also the service that you offer as well.
Yeah, thanks. So easy to find us at Prialto.com. That's Prialto.com. I'm on the website. I'm on LinkedIn. I love this stuff. I love meeting salespeople, sales managers, and we don't have a hard sell. So, if we get a chance to connect, we will just try to be helpful to each other in any way we can. And if my company can be helpful, that's awesome too. But it's not the first way I connect with people.
Amazing stuff. Well, we'll link to that in the show notes over at salesman.red. And with that, Eric, I want to thank you for your time and your insights, mate. And I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Okay, thanks so much. This has been awesome.